Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. If I was to ask you what skill matters more to our physical and mental health than just about any skill out there? Since you're listening to this episode, I'm guessing you know the answer. And of course, the punchline is sleep. Sleep is a really big deal. I refer to it as the hub airport through which all airplanes must pass, so to speak, because every hormonal, physiological, emotional, and psychological aspect of our health travels through sleep, is impacted by sleep. It is not even the ground floor. It is the basement to all of our daily functions. Sleep is such a big deal that you are going to want to geek out to sleep, become a master of your domain when it comes to sleep, and you will hear from our expert why that is just so important to all of us. And that's why I'm so happy to have Mollie Eastman join us as she shares her vast knowledge of this most crucial skill. And I love the idea that Mollie calls this sleep as a skill. This is not something that all of us are necessarily good at doing. We may have had a good relationship with it at one point, but we may have become less skilled over time. So let's listen in as Mollie shares her vast font of knowledge. She is a walking encyclopedia as it comes to sleep, and she could go on for hours about just every little corner and facet of sleep as it relates scientifically, as it relates practically to our lives. So listen in as Mollie and I geek out to sleep as a skill. Mollie Eastman, a hearty welcome to Super Psyched.
Super psyched to be here.
Right on. So I am a big sleep geek. I've gotten on the bus when it comes to sleep and better sleep hygiene. I'm constantly trying to improve it. I definitely see the value. And one of the things that we know about sleep is it's kind of the ground floor, or perhaps even below. It might even be the basement to all human behavior, our neurological functions, our physiological functions, our chemical and hormonal functions all travel through sleep and are affected by sleep. And certainly our immune functions are as well. And I know that you are all in when it comes to sleep. And I'm wondering if you could give a little bit of your backstory before we get into some of the great hacks that you've come up with and what you do as a sleep coach. But how did you get into this?
Sure, absolutely. Well, one, I'm so glad that you're in on this conversation. It's a big deal, and I'm excited that more and more people are jumping in headfirst into the wonderful world of sleep optimization. So really excited to go deeper with you on that today. But I do think my backstory can be helpful to this conversation because I was not always a quantifiably good or exceptional sleeper. And actually, I was a measurably poor sleeper for the majority of my experience of my life and my identity of myself as far as how I thought about my sleep for many years. So as a child, I thought I wasn't a great sleeper, always the last one to fall asleep at the sleepovers or whatever. As I went through college, I would identify as a lot of labels and narratives, kind of maladaptive labels and narratives as it related to my sleep. I'm a short sleeper. I'm a night owl. It's in my genes. I'll sleep when I'm dead. All of these relationships to my sleep. And one that I kind of swam in that it's the way it is for me. I just got to kind of survive it. It's fixed. There's nothing to really look at there. It's just how it's going to be. And that's how I thought about it for so long. And I didn't notice as my habits got more and more extreme, going to bed later and later as a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, didn't correlate an uptick in anxiety. I didn't correlate poor health outcomes. I had shingles in my 20s. I had the beginning of ulcer, right? Some signs that probably how I'm managing things is not really working out. But I didn't make that connection with my sleep in any of those results. And it wasn't until I went through this period of insomnia while traveling internationally with my now husband, Blake Eastman, who I know you had on your podcast. And we've been together now 11 years. And so we've ridden the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. And yet on one of the downswings of entrepreneurship, when we were stressed to the max, bleeding money, just all the things were not working, how it all manifested for me of that level of stress was this experience of I can't sleep. And now we're on the road, a lack of safety or kind of vulnerableness, because now we put all of our stuff into storage and we're going to attempt to kind of be these digital nomads before we were ready for that, have employees and all the responsibilities. And what that ended up looking like for me was I couldn't sleep night after night. I went to the doctors in Croatia and left with their version of Ambien. Then in another place, Xanax.
Well, you just said doctors in Croatia?
Croatia, yes.
Okay.
On the move. We had a
So not just domestic digital nomads. We're talking international digital nomads. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. But this was an ill-fated attempt at digital nomad life because we got this one-way ticket, but my sleep, the result of that, as on the heels of jet lag and what have you, it just started compounding of night after night of not being able to sleep and then anxiety upticking to the max. And so when I went to these different doctors and getting a series of basically benzodiazepines, so a mix of Valium, Xanax, and Ambien. And with all those, there was a lot of layers for me. I had a family history of a lot of pharmaceutical use. So for me, it was very concerning, this path with no real other path around solving this beyond taking a pill each night. And so the fear was really strong for me as far as I need to figure this out. In lieu of what I was standing in was this experience of kind of catastrophic thinking of, oh my gosh, is this always going to be like this? Is this the future that I'm now living into? And that was the fire to figure this out. Thankfully, flash forward, we actually ended up flying back to America, figuring out this whole sleep thing by going down the rabbit hole. And the things that I learned to bring myself back on track with my sleep, which I shared wasn't that great beforehand, to not only get to homeostasis, but then to be able to discover, oh my gosh, it actually is available to me to actually optimize my sleep. And this whole narrative about being bad sleeper, short sleeper, all that was not real. And there was actually an opportunity to quantifiably, with objective data, really log exceptional sleep. In our modern society, not many people are sleeping great.
Right.
And so be able to be on that other right side of the bell curve was a whole new reality for me, completely changed my life. And so organically, I just couldn't stop talking about it. And then these small groups started forming, and then it kind of built itself into what is now Sleep is a Skill. Now, today we have weekly sleep optimization podcast episodes with top sleep experts. We're the #2 sleep podcast. We have weekly sleep optimization newsletters. I've been doing that every year for 4 years, every Monday. In addition to that, have cohort programs where we put people through, basically, it's a 10-week-long program where they're all wearing different wearable pieces of tech, whether certainly grounded in some of the latest sleep trackers, but we often bring in things like continuous glucose monitors and other things that can help support your sleep that many people might not be aware of. And on the other side of that, people lead with tools to really understand in their bones that sleep is a skill, that they are able to bring themselves back into that driver's seat. By virtue of that, we're now in hotels. We work with elite athletes. The track that got created is just phenomenal out of what really was one of my lowest points in my whole life.
Wow. So you really took the pendulum to the other direction and doubled down, geeked out, became a master, or I should say an evolving master in an area that you had no mastery. I love the idea of recognizing that sleep is in fact a skill. It is a behavior. And people just think that it should just happen almost organically. And the fact is, we struggle with sleep. I believe it was somebody like Benjamin Franklin, and I'm going to paraphrase it poorly, is the toughest 2 things I do are going to sleep and waking up. Those are the 2 toughest things I do every day. And I concur. I mean, those are hard things to do well.
Notorious kind of early bird, a notorious early bird for rising early to seize the day and what have you. And that in and of itself can take some level of discipline to not have this roller coaster experience. Oh yeah, sure. Maybe one day I get up early, but then on Saturday and Sunday I sleep in. And, all of those different ways of managing our sleep are very common today. We don't think much about it, but to have that level of discipline, yeah, that's a challenge.
It really is. And I am also appreciating that throughout the life cycle, our relationship with sleep itself may change. We may sleep very well in our childhood, and suddenly in our adolescence, we kind of disrupt it with school and other things. And then we go to college, and lo and behold, we have pretty much stirred the pot so badly that by the time we enter adulthood, we suck at sleeping. How do we sabotage ourselves? Whether kind of on that trajectory that I just described, or perhaps as working adults who are really stressed out, who just basically kind of maybe become either dependent on the benzos you were talking about, like Xanax and
Yeah.
Ambien, or in some other way disrupted. How does that happen, and what can we do?
It's funny you use the word sabotage. We actually have one exercise that we bring people through that looks at what we call your sleep sabotagers in particular. And so it's 17 areas of life, and it's really compartmentalizing virtually your whole life at a bird's eye view, and then giving yourself a self-assessment of kind of where you're falling, understanding that sleep and your perception of your life and where you're at cannot be divorced from each other. And so we do get a sense of how people are thinking about where they're at in their life in particular areas to bring about levels of accountability and kind of behavioral change in those areas that are their self-assessment is scoring lower. So we take action steps in those areas to remind ourselves that we do have that inner locus of control, no matter the area in our life. And even if there's no steps to be taken that are available, if it's moving into acceptance, that's one of the things that we actually practice there. But having said that, one of our overarching theories that sleep is a skill is to why is there, especially in recent years and recent decades, such a tremendous uptick in sleep difficulties. And you can see this logged in many, many areas. For instance, if you go onto Google keyword searches over the decades, since they've been logging this, we see a huge uptick in things like sleep health, insomnia, with incredible upticks during pandemics, naturally, but certainly just this up climbing of a problematic relationship to sleep. And the question is why? Well, one of the theories goes back to this conversation of chronobiology. And chronobiology is the science of time and how time affects our biology. And I think that this is going to be one of the most discussed areas in sleep and health and wellness in the future as it begins to gain more momentum. So what I mean by all of this is essentially the practical application is I often go to this study that was done in 2001 by the EPA, where they found that the average American was spending around 93% of their time indoors. And the reason I say this, and this is back in 2001, before smartphones everywhere, before pandemics, before all of these reasons that there's probably even more instances of people staying inside or in automobiles as they also get logged. And the reason we say this is that if we still just stand to reason that it's kind of similar, we're spending around 7% of our time outdoors. Why is that important when we think sleep? Well, we know that the rhythms of nature so fundamentally inform our sleep-wake cycle, because as diurnal creatures, we're meant to be active during the day and at rest at night. And we know that there are maladaptive and real-world responses when we start deviating from that. For instance, the World Health Organization puts it that just being a shift worker in general can put you at risk as possible cancer-causing pathway that you might be on just by virtue of kind of living outside of these rhythms. So why I mentioned the whole thing about how we're living our lives and being indoor creatures in just really more suddenly in recent years. Well, this is divorcing us from these rhythms and kind of creating this artificial zoo-like environment for us. And because of this, we are not getting proper cues to tell the body what time it is and what to be doing when. And when we think about the body trying to understand this, we want to understand that there is this little node in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is connected to the eyes. And so the eyes stand as a really important kind of connection to reading the environment and understanding what to be doing when, which leads us to the most important of the time givers that tell the body what time it is, which is light. So if you get nothing out of all the things I'm saying, all these words, please get that creating a really powerful relationship to your light dark cycle is part of your key access point to really improving your sleep tremendously. And what would that look like in practical application? What it would look like is one, selecting for yourself a consistent wake up time 7 days a week that you would maintain Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and not really deviating on that weekend or wherever you might deviate. Keep that, and you can kind of swing a bit every 30 minutes. So on plus or minus 30 minutes. So say if you wake up 30 minutes later because you were up a little bit later, or you woke up 30 minutes earlier, all of that's okay. You're kind of anchoring yourself on that wake up time. So that anchoring process is key. Then we want you to marry that wake up process, that anchor, with something known as sunlight anchoring. So sunlight anchoring is getting yourself physically outside, getting that light in your eyes, not from behind sunglasses. So ideally, like throw away all your sunglasses. I don't mean to be over the top, but of course, be responsible.
Really?
If you're driving, if you need that for safety, of course. But we really, in the circadian kind of community, there's a real concern about even how much things like sunglasses throughout the course of the day, hats, all these things that keep us from that high amplitude light, what that does to confuse our rhythms. So get rid of your sunglasses, basically, and be safe and do what you need to do. But I do think that there's something to be said for understanding that even just on that bright light exposure on the first half of the day and that consistent time, the difference that can make to reset your master clock in that suprachiasmatic nucleus then communicates to all these peripheral clocks. Those peripheral clocks are in virtually every cell and organ of your body and all trying to understand what to be doing when. And they also want to be able to prepare for certain things, meaning there's things like metabolic jet lag when we start moving ourselves all up and down on different types of schedules. We're eating at all weird times. That would be the metabolic piece. So you want to ideally create a level of consistency throughout the course of your day where you're eating around the same time, you're waking up around the same time, you're going to bed around the same time, you're being exposed to light around the same time. I'm not trying to make this like a super boring life. Of course, you can have spontaneity and what have you, but this can help actually ground you in such a way that can be so transformative and set you up so that there's automaticity to your sleep. So you don't have to try so much and bring out the meditation apps at night and try to lure yourself to sleep. All of this kind of happens automatically when you do these things because what you're doing is strengthening that circadian rhythm. Most people are probably familiar with your circadian rhythm, which is your 24-hour rhythm that's happening for most of us, like I said, on that 24-hour spectrum. But many of us on this spectrum exist on the weak side. We want to move ourselves over to that stronger side, and all of these consistent practices can help get you there.
I'm thinking about attachment theory and psychology and the idea of a secure attachment versus perhaps an anxious attachment that's informed by our childhoods. And we've been talking about that a lot lately because it has such implications as it relates to our relationships with people, particularly our most significant others.
Sure.
And I'm thinking about the relationship now that we share with our circadian rhythm, that we can strengthen the bond in a similar way. What an interesting idea that because we become so divorced from the sunlight due to modern living, that we are really just killing our relationships with our circadian rhythm. And that's stage one, like getting that suprachiasmatic nucleus to be able to do its job as I'm going to call it the COO. It's kind of the chief operating officer, basically giving directives to the company saying, hey, this is what your organs should be doing now. And without a really secure bond with our circadian rhythm, the SCN can't do its job, which really we're doing ourselves a massive disservice.
I love that, by the way. I just have to underscore, I've never heard anyone describe it like that. And that is so well said. That's amazing.
Oh, right on. Well, thank you for that. And I love the idea of identifying like the 17 sleep sabotagers. I remember back maybe in the early aughts, there was called sleep thieves. And it seems like there are so many potential thieves as it relates to our sleep in modern life, whether it's our devices, our sunglasses now, hats, which blew my mind, which is just terrifying. What are some commonly held misconceptions as they relate to sleep?
Probably the one I hear so often is, oh, my sleep's fine. I fall
Yep,
asleep the minute my head hits the pillow. And that one drives me nuts
totally.
because that one is actually often a red flag for me that there is something wrong with your sleep because you don't want you to be falling asleep the minute your head hits the pillow. We want a healthy sleep latency, the time by which when you lay down your head and when you actually fall asleep, we want that to be healthy timeline. So maybe around 15, 20 minutes or so. And the reason we say that is because if you are falling asleep before that, and we're not trying to be neurotic, it's
Totally.
but
If it's within 8 minutes or less, then you're screwed.
You better be timing that. I'm going to push you.
Yeah, right, totally. And use an old-fashioned sand timer because
Exactly.
right, folks, we're not endorsing that.
Here. Right. But if you are finding that you are having fatigue throughout the majority of the course of your day, the minute you're laying your head on the pillow, you fall asleep, or you're falling asleep at kind of inappropriate times, all those things can act as sort of red flags that there might be something up, either a sleep pathology, whether it looks like things like sleep apnea, upper airway resistance syndrome, just, a management issue of our sleep that maybe we're just chronically sleep deprived. There can be many things at play, or even just the quality of your sleep that you might be getting might be really insufficient, or if there's an environmental problem, maybe there's mold in your space, or air quality, the temperature in your space might be not allowing you to get to some of your deepest levels, but also some of the things that you're doing throughout the course of the day. So the types of foods you're eating, the time that you're having those, the exercise that you're having or not having. There's a whole litany of things that can really impact the quality and results that you have with your sleep. So when people just so blatantly have it that they're fine, and there's nothing else that they can do, I really question that because to your point, the way you opened to this podcast, you spoke to kind of sleep mastery and continuing to look at this. I mean, I'm not done with quote unquote improving my sleep or looking at my sleep because there's all kinds of new dynamics that come to play. You start traveling more, or you have a kid, or you lose a job, or what have you. Things that you thought were handled might now get a shakeup. And there's an opportunity to use our sleep from a vantage point of really giving us a pulse on the workability of our life and seeing, is there something at play, almost a barometer of, oh, shoot, am I getting a little overly stressed? Is my nervous system a little overly taxed? Is that showing up in some of my sleep results? And it can really take the temperature on your life, and you can use that to help support new choices that you might make.
Love that. And speaking of new choices that we might make, what are the lowest hanging fruit? What are the easiest things that we can do that might have a big impact on our sleep? Using that idea as sleep as a skill, how can we improve our skill of sleep in the perhaps easiest ways?
Totally. Okay. So let me just throw out a couple of just the most top of mind common things that I see that can make the most impactful, measurable difference. Whether hopefully if you're sleep tracking, you really encourage people to sleep track nowadays. But even if you are top down, lowest hanging fruit, alcohol, THC, certain things that we might be taking that can negatively impact our sleep results. And I don't mean to just throw THC out there because that can be a valid option for some people as opposed to say like opioids for pain management or other things. But I will say alcohol is one of the top elements there, depending on if you're in an optimization conversation, if you're not talking about pain, then the removal of things like THC can be really impactful as well. Then meal timing is one of the more common ones I see. People say, oh, I don't eat late, not a problem. But then when we actually look, we want to think about there's this whole world of chrononutrition and looks at the timing of your food. A lot of this comes out of some really landmark research from Dr. Sachin Panda out of the Salk Institute, decades of research, even discussions of could he be tapped as possible Nobel Prize winning work. So really, really important stuff here. And I think we'll see a lot more about this, but some of his research looks to when is the first bite of food you're having and when is the last bite of food you're having? And when we say food, that also means anything really besides water. The argument is that kind of turns on those clocks that we were talking about. So if you are all throughout the course of the day eating and drinking things besides water, that can tell your body certain things about what time it is and what to be doing when, and have a thermal response, and might be heating up your body at the wrong time, closer to bed, when we actually, what important kind of cue for the body is to be lowering body temperature before sleep to get you into some of those deeper stages of sleep. One of the most important things I would have people look at from that piece would be, when is that last bite of food? At least having it around 3 hours before bed, ideally. But sometimes I will say anecdotally that with people that are tracking things and testing things with different wearables, a large swath of people seeing improvements when they're actually moving that even earlier. So 4 or 5 hours before bed, having that last bite of food. And all of this often goes in the realm of what's called circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, which is really just a fancy series of words of like trying to eat when the sun is out and not eating as much when the sun is down. And so that is something that really just allows us to give the digestive system a break. And so it's not even really fasting per se, it's just giving it a break before sleep so that you can work on all these other restorative properties, particularly one that's getting a lot of press, which is your lymphatic drainage. And that's the drainage process in the brain that we're seeing possible correlations with things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. So if we are spending all this time, unfortunately, giving the body extra homework that it doesn't really need of digestion, which is taxing while you're sleeping, versus allowing it to really clear the brain and do all the other great things it's needing to do during the first stage of sleep, which is largely deep sleep. And a lot of people complain that they're not getting enough deep sleep. Well, one of the access points to that can be that food timing piece. So I would say that. I would also say making your sleep environment cooler. Now, Sleep Foundation recommends anywhere from 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit for your sleep environment. A lot of people are like, that's so cold. We don't want you to be uncomfortable, obviously, but seeing if you can just kind of nudge that a little bit cooler than you might normally have. Things like cooling mattress toppers, eight sleep, chilly sleep, different things available to cool that body can also help lower your heart rate, improve your HRV. So those would be some other steps you can take. And then really optimizing that light dark cycle that we were speaking to. So of course, I mentioned getting as much of that light on the first half of the day, but it's also important to get as much darkness on the second half of the day. Melatonin is known as the vampire hormone or the hormone of darkness. And so the reason it gets that name is that in order to get sufficient naturally created melatonin, what is required is to bathe ourselves in darkness leading up to sleep, and even just quick shots of bright light, opening up your refrigerator with the giant blinding light in the middle of the night, or walking to the bathroom, turning on those overhead lights or what have you, can really impact that reserve that you're building of melatonin. So you want to do your due diligence to really eliminate those sources in your sleep environment.
Brilliant. It's just such a delicate balance because 1,000 years ago and before, we didn't have refrigerators that could disrupt our sleeps. Our brains aren't used to these modern conveniences, which are delightful. And I'm so grateful they exist. And they certainly do sabotage. I would love to geek out a little bit further about the whole idea of lymphatic drainage as well as the HRV. So let's first start with lymphatic drainage. This idea or this reality that our brain basically goes into a deep clean cycle. And that when we don't allow it to do its job, we are actually causing filth in our brains. We're actually causing it to marinate in suboptimal fluids, as I understand it. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Yes, 100%. And that's also why there's some excitement around some of the conversations of different ways to optimize the cleansing of the brain. So some kind of biohacks can be, and these are just still need more studies, but these are conversations that people are having of experimentation of things like using ketone esters to help support a cleansing of the brain. So people might practice things like ketosis for epilepsy and seizures, and how that process can arguably help support the cleansing of the brain.
Wait, rewind for a second. Seizures?
Yes.
How's that coming in?
So that's looking at ketosis has historically been utilized as a kind of evidence-based treatment
For people with epilepsy and seizures.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's
Isn't that
why,
fascinating?
and then actually one of the things that I'm really excited about, because this kind of overlays into sleep, is this whole new conversation of things like metabolic psychiatry. And so I'd love to talk to you about that in the future too, of some of these conversations of how our metabolic health and brain health and mitochondrial health, all of these, how they can play a role in some of our psychiatric symptoms. So we can't talk about sleep without thinking about how we're thinking and anxiety and all of these other kind of subsequent things that can come out of that. But sorry, I didn't mean to take us on a tangent, but that relates to the brain,
Fascinating.
right? From a perspective of, so some people, if you don't necessarily want to go into ketosis, or, I'm not saying anyone has to do that, but it's people are looking at shortcuts of, could we take external ketone esters to help further kind of cleanse the brain, if you will? So those are some theories that need more studies behind it. But back to the specifics around lymphatic drainage, what's really important is that while you're sleeping, the traditional architecture, healthy person sleep, is that on the front half, you're going into more clear rhythms of deep sleep. And then you're oscillating and cycling over into more REM on the second half of your night. So on the first half, there's a theory that, why do we prioritize this deep sleep first? Why is that the first thing that the body goes for? And is that possibly because, these are all theories, is that possibly because we want to prioritize that cleansing lymphatic drainage process where the brain actually kind of shrinks in size when this is happening to allow for more surface area of that cerebral spinal fluid to then go through the brain to then take out all of that extra excess toxic waste, essentially cellular toxic waste, right? And to get that out of the brain. But if you're not allowing optimal environments or conditions for the brain to do this and to get into deep sleep, like as simple as just having a little bit of nighttime, for me, it was like nighttime popcorn and a glass of
totally.
water. All those things that we just like, what's the big deal?
Totally, 100%.
Like, who cares? Well, unfortunately, we're doing that night after night. It can impede our ability to get into those levels of deep sleep, to get to that proper lymphatic drainage, and then to allow all that kind of buildup of amyloid beta plaques that can then find themselves not being properly kind of shuttled out. That can pose a problem. And could that be connected to things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia? Okay.
Wow. So the lymphatic piece is humongo. And I'm so glad you unpacked that for us. It seems like, it's almost like an overnight dishwasher for our brain, that if we don't really let it go through its full cycle, we cause all kinds of problems potentially down the road, including things as dire as Alzheimer's. Let's talk a little bit about HRV, also known as heart rate variability, and its relationship. What is HRV and why should we care about it as it relates to sleep?
So HRV is essentially the time between the heartbeats. And the reason that we should even care about that, since it is really known as more of a noisy metric and on purpose, it has the word variability in the title. So it is meant to be variable. And because of that, what it's really looking to understand is how apt is your body to recover kind of moment to moment with whatever it has to deal with. So that includes things like throughout the course of the day, your digestion system, your athleticism, just even talking, standing, all of these things. How quick can your body respond to what's being asked of it, essentially? And the reason that relates to sleep is it often is referred to as our metric of recovery. How well can you recover second to second? And when we think about sleep, sleep is really a opportunity for us to recover throughout the course of every single day, go throughout our evening, and hopefully wake up with a sense of rejuvenation and feeling better than we could have, right? By not having that. So if our HRV is consistently being impaired from whatever baseline we've established of our HRV, if we're seeing it dipping below, it acts as this amazing warning sign or kind of signal or red flag that something is impeding the nervous system and its ability to kind of respond in turn. Or on the flip side, if we're seeing it really often, and I don't mean to overly generalize, but largely, if you're seeing an upturn in HRV from your baseline, then that typically means that you're recovering really well. And so then we also want to know about that. We want to know, what are you doing that is helping to support you in that way? So it gives us a lot of really cool information to help inform some of our choices too. We don't want to be like at the effect of this number at all, but we do want you to see overall trends. And the number of people that I've been able to help support in discovering that they have COVID, they've gotten sick, they're really getting burnt out, all of those things from that metric in particular is wild. So, really have a real practical application for you. I've also seen clients, I have a 72-year-old client that was able to spot cancer from the fact that he had years and years of data that he was tracking, and suddenly his HRV was just really impaired. He went to the doctor, oh, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And then when he continued on, they discovered that he had cancer. He was able to then spot it early and really make a difference with this. So it's just some of the practical applications of this. And it's really, I think, an exciting time from a quantified self perspective. But I like it even not just for like more data for data's sake. I like it as just a really cool way at awareness and self-discovery and introspection. The number of people that I've had as kind of an assignment for them to look back at their data over often of them have years and years of data. And we see, okay, when your HRV was really going great, when things were really working, what were we doing then? What was happening? And often it's, I was exercising, I was feeling good, I was socializing, I was this, I was that, whatever was really working for them. And then we had this big dip. What was going on there? Well, all right, I was eating late, I was drinking a lot, I was this other. So we can kind of find things that work for us and also get to see, wow, I'm this dynamic person that based on the choices that I make, I have particular results and I'm at the source of that.
Phenomenal. And what are some basic things that people can do? Just if you were to give like the laundry list, I believe you mentioned exercise. I believe that even ice baths can help with HRV. What are some basic, if you were to give simple things that people can do to improve their HRV, what are they?
Okay. So one, they would all go within these 7 kind of strategies that we really stand behind at Sleep is a Skill. The first one, I mentioned light, super important, especially if you're in a northern hemisphere location. Throughout the large half of your year, you might really struggle to get sufficient vitamin D, which is really a hormone. And it's crucial for us to be able to get sufficient sleep because it's a precursor to serotonin, and which is a precursor to melatonin. So getting that light right, if you are deficient in that, not being able to actually create that kind of feel good hormone of serotonin or feel well hormone, and then creating enough of that melatonin, then you're likely to have impacted HRV. So we do want to support you there. So one kind of strategy we often mention, I have no affiliation with this company, but Spurdy is a lamp that actually helps. It's FDA cleared to generate vitamin D from a lamp. So you can even get it written off by your insurance for many people if you have things like eczema, psoriasis, because it's an actual approach. So that would be one thing I would suggest for people, especially if you're in like Canada and you don't have something like this, I would really ask you to explore some strategy.
Yeah. It's photon deficient.
Yeah, or even in these northern hemisphere locations, really it's above the 37th parallel. So if you're above the 37th parallel, you are much more hindered in your ability to get sufficient vitamin D. So getting that handles would be really important. And then if you need to supplement, there's different theories on what might be lacking just by taking external supplementation, but good vitamin D and K2 source might be an approach. Then getting sufficient darkness so that you get sufficient melatonin in the evening. And then you're getting that proper sleep. So that would be important. So you could get blue blockers, red light, Himalayan salt lamps, just candles, fire, all of those things could and actually be like a true strategy. We had an anthropology professor on the podcast that every semester he asks of his students to take the candlelight challenge, and many of them do not. But if you, and the candlelight challenge is where you just use candlelight as your light source post sunset and see what happens to your sleep. So if you want to try taking that, please do. Let me know how that works out. But even if you won't do that, then Himalayan salt lamp, the red lights or otherwise to be helpful. The next one would be temperature. So certainly shifting the ambient temperature, like we mentioned, getting your body temperature high throughout the day and cool throughout the night. And so there are lots of different ways you can do that. One, you mentioned cold therapy. So ice baths, we traditionally recommend those on the first half of your day because of the paradoxical warming effect that happens thereafter. And it just is like a dopamine hit and you're excited and all these great things when you
So don't do the ice bath perhaps in the latter half of the day.
Right. Especially when you're trying to get like your personal best or whatever, then that can really amp you up. And that might send a kind of counter signal if you're doing that right before bed, because oddly, then it actually warms up your body higher than it might have been the core body temperature thereafter once it starts that warming effect. So then the opposite is true. On the other side, the traditional thinking right now is that heat therapy in the evening. So I'm obsessed with sauna in the evening. If you have that available for you, you can even do cool, easy, and affordable DIY options. I have a good friend known as Quantified Bob. He's got like a long time blog. He has a option to build a $150 sauna for yourself out of kind of DIY. So whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah, kind of setting yourself up so that you can get, if you want to get some of that heat therapy or just hot baths, because then there's that paradoxical response on the other side to cool the body. So that's the bodily temperature piece from the behavioral side, but you can also ambient style lower the temperature in your space with air conditioner or the cooling mattress pad or both. So those would be some strategies there. Then after that is meal timing. We mentioned that I would highly suggest for people to experiment with this piece where you can even get apps. So like the Circadian app is one. Sachin Panda has some apps. I believe it's called On Time or In Time, one of those. So there's different things that you can do to kind of gamify this. Certainly there's another app called Zero. You just select a circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, and then you can log how often you're eating within sunrise and sunset and kind of gamify this. I'd also highly recommend, if you have it available to you in your budget, to get a continuous glucose monitor. The people that we do that with in our programs, just it can often be mind blowing the difference that can make, especially if you're someone that complains of wake ups in the middle of the night. If you have a roller coaster of glucose problems, which many of us do and have no idea, that can really be part of the source point of the why for those wake ups that are really frustrating in the middle of the night. So I highly suggest that. And then you can move into exercise timing. Where are you putting your movement throughout the day? And if you're not putting movement anywhere, like let's bring that in because that will help support you getting to deeper levels of sleep. But ideally, we're putting that on the earlier side of the day. It doesn't have to be super early, but just as long as ideally when the sun is out and that you're not going too late into the night, because then, it's raising your body temperature, it's raising your heart rate, all of that. So we try not to do that too close to bed. Then thought timing being one. And I'm sure you've got lots of amazing content on this topic. And so we call it thought timing to start auditing the types of thoughts that you're engaging in and noticing what times you're participating in those. So meaning, are you seeing that you notice a pattern where, oh, geez, I'm talking to my partner about the bills or the kids or the whatever in the evening. How can we shuffle that and move that earlier? So kind of the timing piece, so that we're not trying to divorce you from...
They're like caffeinated thoughts.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because we're looking to down regulate the brain in the evening. And instead of being in kind of that stress beta brain state, we're looking to kind of just shift that down. And if you consistently see that the types of thoughts you're engaging in as a result of the screens and the whatever you're on, how can we kind of shake that up a bit? So that would be the thought timing piece. And it's probably noteworthy to know that the types of thoughts you engage in can actually heat up or cool down the brain. So there's certain clinical trials looking at the fact that hyperinsomniacs tend to have more warm prefrontal cortex brain matter when they're in those kind of hyper-aroused brain states. So cooling the brain is one strategy. There's actually gadgets on the market. You don't need to go buy those necessarily, but they're set up to kind of almost be like a cooling cap for the brain to help with sleep onset. Well, we can also do that by managing our thoughts in a way that will actually have the opposite effect and calm and relax and cool down that brain to lead up for sleep. And then the last one would be chronopharmacology or drug timing. And so the timing of your drugs. And so that would include things like caffeine. What time are you having those? Kind of shuffling those around depending on are you fast or slow metabolizer of caffeine. And you can even test this with your genes. So you can get genetic testing and see where do you fall. Then, of course, the timing of things like alcohol. So some people say, okay, I'm not giving up alcohol. All right, fine. Can we move that earlier on into the day? But we're big proponents of day drinking or boozy brunches. So trying to work that out of your system before sleep so that we could actually get you decent sleep. We also look at a lot of alternative state changers. So we've got a whole slew of things that people can have a state change with that might not be alcohol specifically. So there's other things that you can bring in to kind of still change that state without really wrecking your sleep. And then lastly, with all of this, I really recommend a sleep tracker nowadays. It's possible if in your budget or what have you, just be rest. Exactly, right?
I'm
Exactly.
showing her my Aura ring, which I've been enjoying. I have no affiliation with Aura, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And there are many different wearables on the market. So whatever one strikes your fancy that is looking at sleep in particular, but that also gives you some of those other metrics we were speaking about, like heart rate and the heart rate variability, or your respiratory rate, your body temperature. And now many of them will do your blood oxygen, which everything I've been talking about, if you do all these things, but if you have sleep apnea or upper air resistance syndrome or other sleep pathologies, I mean, you're
Deal with
missing a
them.
whole part of that story. So I guess the last thing I would say is that we encourage you to stand in this context that sleep is a skill. And if you begin with kind of sleep 101 and just start to explore any great skill, it would behoove you to take a look at some of this latest research on that skill and practice it and experiment with it until you really gain more mastery. And I think that's available to any of us.
Yeah, so we're getting to the final question. And Molly, I'm just appreciating how you are truly a font of knowledge when it comes to sleep. Your passion is evident by your levels of ability to articulate. It sounds like you could probably do a 50-hour masterclass based on just your knowledge alone. But I'm wondering if you were able to confer magically upon all humanity the skill of sleep. I love the idea of it being a skill. What do you imagine the impact would be on the individual as well as perhaps society at large?
It is my mission on this planet to really provide people with a sense of agency to transform their sleep, because I really believe that it's the place to stand. You mentioned it possibly being like the basement, kind of foundational place to begin. I really believe that if we look at our life through the lens of an optimization from this most fundamental state, that not only do we have the possibility to transform our own health, our mental health, but also how we interact with the people around us, and really, by and large, as a ripple effect, transform the planet by ensuring that we are taking care of this area that so fundamentally gives us our results in our health and our life. And as a homage to the work that you do, I'm particularly passionate about the effects of mental health in its relationship to sleep. I would kind of defer to you, but my understanding is that we really struggle to find even a single diagnostic piece of the DSM that relates to a pathology in our mental health that doesn't have some connection to sleep. There.
Everything is improved or exacerbated by the presence of sleep or the absence of sleep.
Yes, 100%. And I think we're only just starting to scratch the surface of our understanding of just how fundamentally this shifts and creates this bi-directional relationship to these other areas of wellness. So just a quick preview for what I mean by that. For instance, if you even just have 1 or 2 nights of insufficient sleep, we know that your resting glucose is now raising itself up, and you are likely to be craving those things that maybe wouldn't normally. We also know that anxiety levels tend to rise, your kind of poor decision-making response system. So error rates that you might make on certain tests, that spills into things like car accidents. It spills into things like safety concerns on the job. I mean, we struggle to find a single area of life that is not impacted by not managing this area powerfully. So I think to bring back the power to the individual, if you really start to prioritize this area, I think many people are dramatically shocked in a lot of ways at the impact that the ripple effect this can have across many areas of their life.
Could not agree more. And I'm just even going to go relationally. I think our relationships would improve dramatically if our sleep improved. We are less tightly wound. We're more giving and generous and forgiving when we sleep better. So there are just many reasons that sleep as a skill has to be pursued by all 7+ billion of us. I think we would have a much better planet, fewer, as you were saying, cognitive errors, and just, I think it's essential for the greater good. In fact, one of the other, in addition to calling it the basement, I used to call it the hub. So if you can think of like Denver Airport, DFW, Chicago O'Hare, Heathrow, whatever, every airplane passes through those and everything passes through sleep. So I'm really grateful to you for all that you're doing to help be kind of the Johnny Appleseed of sleep and getting the message out there so that people can live better lives in every which way. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. That was a lot of fun, Mollie.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you for creating this forum for people like myself to share the things that we're passionate about. It just really makes a huge difference out there on the planet. And I appreciate your shared appreciation for this area. It's a big deal. And just really thank you for the time and the creation of this platform.
My pleasure. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe